next featured speaker is Jonathan Taplin. I've known Jonathan about 5 years. He's a vehement supporter of copyright and of creators. His biography is really fascinating. I have to repeat a little bit of it. He started out life at Princeton as tour manager for Bob Dylan. He's produced movies in Hollywood for Martin Scorsese, more than one, Last Waltz being one you may have heard of. He is director Emeritus of the Innovation Lab at USC. He's an author, and his book, some of his books have been on Financial Times top 10 list. He's a really interesting guy with very strong opinions, and I'll let him explain what that means. John Taplin.
Thank you, Bruce. This forum is called The Future of Intellectual Property. And so I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the future. This is the next book I'm in the middle of writing called The End of Reality, the Metaverse, Crypto, NFTs, and the End Age of Unreason. And I wrote a book, it came out in 2017, called Move Fast and Break Things, How Facebook, Google, and Amazon Cornered Culture and Undermined Democracy. And so I've gone over that. I feel I've talked about that a lot. And when it came out, I wrote it in 2016. When it came out, it was considered controversial. In fact, it was so controversial that the English publisher said, well, we can't have this undermined democracy stuff in there, you know. So I insisted, and of course, it turned out to be okay. In the world of intellectual property, I believe these same companies, plus a few more, will continue to be the gorillas. I mean, needless to say, I don't need to tell you that Google's market cap is 20 times as big as Walt Disney. You know, I mean, so there's no competition of where that goes. What worries me is that the people who've run these companies have now engaged and entered and are trying to pull us into a fantasy world, both the metaverse, where we will live in a world of complete virtual reality for 7 hours a day. That's Mark Zuckerberg's business plan. You know, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. That's one of the craziest ideas that anyone ever thought of. Like he would manufacture cars on Mars and then have to ship them back here, you know. And of course, the greatest unreality is these people have put forth this kind of disinformation ecosystem in which 40% of the people who get their news online believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save our country. Some people have called this the politics of inevitability, which is this sense of techno-determinism that we're on a path and these brilliant billionaires know what they're doing and we don't have any choice. We're going down the path they choose. And I think that's basically wrong. Now, needless to say, I believe that companies like Facebook are essentially what the French economists call rentiers, rent takers. They don't really add much, but they build their companies off of taking money off the top. Now, there's a reason why Facebook has a gross profit margin of 80%. Think about that. Walmart's gross margin is 31%. Why is Facebook's margin 80%? Because they don't pay for any content? and they don't pay for the transportation of the content to your door. So the two basic factors of any company are not things that they have to worry about. They basically are surfing off the intellectual property of other companies. And of course, the fact of that is, let's just take newspaper revenue. Newspaper business used to be a good business. Now it's a shitty business because Facebook takes all the money off the top, even though they're pushing New York Times, USA Today content on their platform. The same thing with the music business. Even though it's begun to come back, the music business was totally put in the toilet because of these people. Now, the guy who runs Spotify, and just think of this, 60,000 new tunes are added to Spotify every single day. 60,000. And Daniel Ek, who runs it, says, I believe that by 2025 we could have as many as 50 million creators on our platform whose art is enjoyed by 1 billion users around the world. Does anyone in this room believe there are 50 million great musicians in the world? I don't think so. In fact, I think, if you think about a platform like Spotify, 1% of the artists make 88% of the money. 1%. When I was in the music business in the 60s, I used to work for Bob Dylan. We used to talk about the 80-20 rule. A record company would make 80% of its revenue off of 20% of their product. Today, 90% of the revenue is made off of 1% of the product. So Jay-Z and Beyonce and, Adele do really well, and everybody else, there are probably 4 million tracks on Spotify that have only been listened to by the artist himself, his mother, and his girlfriend. The problem is, this is a libertarian delusion. And the whole new economy, Web3, that is being put forth is a libertarian delusion. Somehow you're going to democratize the web. This is totally bogus. So let's be clear. As the Washington Post put it out, the global pandemic added about $1 trillion to the network of America's tech elite, and 1/5 of that money flowed into the pockets of two men, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Now, these people don't want anything to change. And so, as the Post also pointed out, hyperpartisanship is the most powerful force supporting the status quo. If you've got everybody arguing against, nothing is going to change. And so the big platforms work hard to fan the flames. Facebook is thrilled to have people going crazy on their platform, and they feed some stuff to the Democrats, sometimes the Republicans, because they know nothing will change. When I started talking about this in 2017, I actually thought something might change, and nothing has changed in terms of regulation. Now, the biggest lie of Web3 is that this is going to democratize the web. And Jack on Twitter nailed it. You don't own Web3. The VCs and their limited partners do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity with a different label. Know what you're getting into. Stephen Deal, brilliant computer scientists. It's the age-old pitch of charlatans and snake-oil salesmen, except this time around it's being pushed by the world's largest investors who have deep bags of tokens to dump. 95% of Bitcoin is owned by 2% of the accounts. Talk about a centralized economy. It's nuts. And of course, those people, the miners, dump this stuff out that they got at $5 a coin to people who are now paying $40,000 a coin. They're thrilled to dump it out and let the suckers think. And then obviously, aggregation theory says when services compete without constraints of geography or marginal costs, dominance is achieved by controlling demand, not supply, and winners take most. That's why Facebook and Google are two of the largest corporations in the world. Now we're being told that the future is the metaverse. As Mark Andreessen said, we should build and we are building online worlds that make life and work and love wonderful for everyone, no matter what level of reality deprivation they find themselves in. Think about that concept, reality deprivation. So the people who are snorting crack or taking, meth in the Appalachians, are they reality deprived? Of course they are. But are they the target audience for this? Where you will be able to buy, you notice you won't have any legs because that's too hard for computers to do, but you will be able to buy outfits for the top half of your avatar from Gucci, from all sorts of high-end brands are going to start selling you clothes for your avatar so you can look fabulous. And by the way, you may be a fan of Tony Stark in the Avengers. Well, you can live in Tony Stark's house. And you can even date Gwyneth Paltrow because Facebook will rent her to you, her avatar, to you for a night. And you can live a total fantasy life. And maybe that'll be a better life than your shitty life. But I'm not positive this is a good thing. Now, where does Facebook want to take this? Well, this is their next iteration. Now, it won't be quite this complicated, but they basically want you to be able to think something, and it'll happen within the metaverse. You think, I want to turn right, I want to turn left, I want to squat down. You just think it, and your avatar will do it. But of course, their notion is not that. They want to say that you see that cool thing from Tiffany in the Tiffany shop that you've passed as you're walking down the metaverse shopping mall, and it tingles something in your brain. And then, of course, half an hour later, oh, there's a billboard for that object, and all you have to do is push this button, and bang, you've bought it for 5 Bitcoin. Or Facebook obviously wants to do their own coin called Libra. Now, they got into some problems with the regulators on this, but I promise you, it'll be back. Because this whole world will be a place where you have to pay to get everything. And of course, as those of you who are old enough to have remembered Second Life, what will be the big first application? Virtual porn. You know it. What made the VHS cassette work? Porn. What made streaming media work? Porn. And this will be the world of the metaverse. Porn and first-person shooter games. And maybe that's a world, but Rob Horning says Facebook would also like to secure the ability to prevent people from any right to absence. The metaverse will fundamentally be a place you will force to be. Now, as I said, Zuckerberg's business plan is that you will spend 7 hours a day with a helmet on. Now you say, how is that possible? Well, he said, well, you'll do your meetings in virtual and you will do everything, but really underneath it all is this idea. My son does some work for a company called Waymo. You all know about Waymo. They have autonomous cars, right? And they're about to introduce Waymo to San Francisco. Waymo is already working with 500 cars in Phoenix where nobody is driving. It's the coolest car service in Phoenix. Now in San Francisco, the test is going to start in about 3 weeks. We'll still have a guy there, but he won't be touching the wheel just because the city council wants to have some insurance. But from Waymo's point of view, within 5 to 7 years, all the cars' services will be driverless. Okay, so think about that. Think about most of the long-haul trucking being driverless. So let's say we put 10 million people out of work. From Zuckerberg's point of view and from Bezos's point of view and from all these people's point of view, the secret is universal basic income. They will essentially force the government to pay people to sit home for 7 hours a day in the Metaverse. Because they'll be so fucking bored, they won't know what to do other than go pretend they're Tony Stark. So this is a deeply dark vision of the world, but that has to be the reason, because there's no other reason you could think that he says he will have 1 billion people by 2030 inside the Metaverse for 7 hours a day. There's no other way that can happen unless we have hundreds, millions of people out of work living on universal basic income. A couple other problems. Virtual bullies. You've all experienced bullying online. I'm sure you've experienced it horribly because you're a coder and in a world that's filled with asshole boys, But Andy Bosworth, who's the CTO of Metaverse, says there is no way in the world to police bullies online. In other words, you're walking down the street and somebody can come up and just whack the hell out of you. Now, it's just virtual. He beat you up virtually, but it's still the same thing. So let's talk about crypto. This morning, Ezra Klein, who I think is probably one of the smartest people in the world, on his podcast put out an epic takedown on crypto. And he starts this way. The hype around cryptocurrencies has reached a fever pitch. There are Super Bowl ads for crypto companies featuring celebrities like Matt Damon and Larry David. The Staples Center in Los Angeles is now the Crypto.com arena. Behind that hype is this distinct vision, a more decentralized economy where individuals have more autonomy over their finances, a grassroots internet free of the not-so-visible big hand of big tech, and a cultural ecosystem where artists and musicians can fairly monetize their work. But what if that vision is deeply flawed? What if the technology undergirding the cryptocurrencies isn't what it's cracked up to be? Or what if the technology does work, yet the world it creates isn't a decentralized utopia, but a hyper-financialized dystopia? That, I believe, is what's going to happen. And if you listen to Ezra's podcast, you will come to the same conclusion. Just show you one thing here. If this is not a bubble, I don't know what is. And of course, like all bubbles, This is Thanksgiving, when Bitcoin was at 60,000 a coin, and then it came down to 35,000 a coin. So all bubbles do burst. But here's the other problem. The central core of all online crime is crypto, right? All ransomware is crypto, all crypto fraud. So there's almost 15 billion of crypto fraud last year. There was almost 18 billion of ransomware. So essentially $35 billion in crime is attributable to crypto. And now cryptocurrencies are being used by the Russians to evade sanctions. Now, the Wall Street Journal has said that NFTs, cryptocurrencies, and Web3s are the multi-level marketing scheme for a new generation. Now, those of you who don't know what I mean by multi-level marketing, is essentially a pyramid scheme, right? The first people in sell stuff to the next people in, and eventually someone gets holding the bag. And of course, as I've mentioned, you've got Matt Damon and Larry David and Reese Witherspoon and Kim Kardashian all shilling for saying this. And Matt Damon basically dares you. He says, fortune belongs to the bold. In other words, if you don't invest in this, you're a chicken. You're a wimp. And so I think it's an intergenerational theft because as the statistics prove, about 80% of the customers for crypto are below 35 years of age. So it's older people shilling younger people, to lose their fortunes. So how does this relate to intellectual property? So this is OpenSea, which is the largest platform for selling NFTs. It's owned by Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen. And they admitted to the Wall Street Journal that 80% of the NFTs on their platform were plagiarized works, fake collections, and spam. So here's one by Beeple, who, as you probably know, sold one for $60 million. This one he sold for only $8 million. But if that's not Mickey Mouse, I don't know what it is. And I asked Bob Iger, who's a friend of mine, hey, did you guys get any money from that for Disney? Of course not. Now, you all know that you could prevent this in a second, right? Computer vision AI could look at every image that's put on this platform and realize whether it's owned by someone like Disney, Marvel, Lucasfilm, whatever, and say, no, that has to go off. But Peter Thiel said, well, the community didn't like that when we tried to police it. The community. What the hell? Okay, so what does this mean? So I believe what we're doing is we're creating a new class. We've always had the ruling class, the 1%, and the managerial elite who work for the 1%, maintaining their fortunes. And then we have the working class, most of whom have unions, health care, and 401ks. And then we have this new class, which British economists call the precariat. And some of them are lucky enough to work above the application program interface, and they tell computers what to do. But a lot more of them work below the API, and computers tell them what to do. That's the Uber driver, the Amazon warehouse worker, all of that. And I promise you, within 10 years, all these jobs will be automated. Every one of them. That Amazon warehouse will work lights out with about 5 people running the computers. Now, the people who support universal basic income these companies are the ones that are really pushing it because they know what's coming. They know what the future is. And so they're trying to get the government to do that so that then you can spend your 7, 8, 9 hours a day in the metaverse. So what's to be done? Well, the first thing that's to be done is we have to repeal safe harbor. I don't know if you know what safe harbor is, but obviously if you're in the copyright business, you ought to know what it is. So this is the special liability shield that online services have been given to say they are not responsible for anything that happens on their platform. So I cannot sue YouTube if they put up music that I have owned the copyright to for them posting it. They say it's not us. One of our users posted it. And yet YouTube, you notice, has no porn on it, right? 100,000 people a day try to post porn on YouTube, and it gets blocked because they've installed very expensive artificial intelligence. Then when you try and upload a piece of porn to YouTube, it sees the bare breast and it puts it into a separate queue, and then a human looks at it, and if for some reason it's some National Geographic ethnographic film, maybe they'll allow it on the platform, but otherwise it goes in the trash. They could do that with NFTs, they could do that with music, they could do all of that, but they don't have to because they have safe harbor. Secondly, Facebook should be forced to sell Instagram and WhatsApp in order to ensure that the rent-taking monopoly on social media advertising is ended. And by the way, the rent-taking in the metaverse will get much worse because you're walking along and they will create just for you the billboards that will be in your vision that you will not be able to look away from. Third, cryptocurrency needs to be brought under the purview of the SEC. Today, nobody regulates crypto. The exchanges are supposed to be regulated by the Commodities Futures Commission, but they aren't really. And the currency itself is not considered a security, so the Securities and Exchange Commission cannot regulate it. And finally, computer vision AI detection needs to be required to run an NFT exchange. So that's what I have to say. I'm happy to take any questions, and feel free to think about it. And by the way, just one thing. There's a new law that's just been put up called the Smart IP Act. Senators Tillis and Leahy, Smart Copyright Act of 2022. And it's the first break in safe harbor I've seen in a long time. So I think that's important. Any questions?